Greetings, brothers and sisters. So Jimmy Kimmel's had Hunter Biden's on last night to discuss his book, which was largely in part about his crack addiction, his overcoming his crack addiction, which he had up until it appears to be at least 2020. So he's been sober for maybe a year, possibly, if he is. And he's written a book about it, and he's getting what we see as preferential coverage. You see this is the way they've been covering JoJo the whole time he's run for president, where, they go and do these protective interviews at friendly networks, friendly TV shows, whatever it might be, where they're asked softball questions. So this is the thing they do for politicians when they're protecting them, right? They don't put them out there where they're going to get asked real questions by real journalists or even, partial journalists. And in this case, Hunter Biden is being provided cover by Jimmy Kimmel's in this horrible interview. And they're like glorifying, like they're treating him, Jimmy Kimmel is treating him like he's some sort of success story. Like he's some kind of, and Joe is a great parent and they're a wonderful family. Like it's just, this is a comedian who makes his living, a vicious comedian who mocks people across the board, celebrities and politicians. And I mean, it's been horrible about the Trumps, right? He hates Donald Trump and his family. And he has a president's son who's a admitted crack addict. And he has, that's just the tip of the iceberg. He's the worst of these, there's always these dysfunctional relatives of the presidents, right? They all have somebody in their family or that's kind of an embarrassment. And Hunter Biden is by far the worst one. Like it's hilarious that the president has a crackhead son. And again, who impregnated a stripper. I'll cover all these things as we go through it. And so he's got all this comic material with this guy. Jimmy Kimmel does, but he just completely lays down. Like it's hilarious at its level of incompetence.
Our next guest is probably the most famous board member of a Ukrainian energy company of all time. His new memoir.
See, he's making light of something. He is, taking the fangs out of something by making a joke about it. That's what comedians can do, right? They can normalize something. Oh, it's not that bad, The guy got a job he didn't deserve because his dad was vice president, and there was political implications and implications of, crimes being committed and being, bought for influence over a president and corruption and billions of dollars. No, he's just, he's just the most famous board member of Ukrainian gas company. It's like they're taking the corruption and the criminality out of this thing.
I have to tell you, after reading this book, I'm impressed that you're alive. I really am. It is amazing that you are alive after all the crazy things that you've been through.
Yep. Did you hear what this MNFer just said? He's impressed that he's alive. Like he did something great, right? Like, he climbed Mount Everest or something, which, that isn't to me even great. But like he's done something, courageous or what. I'm impressed that you're alive. He was a crack addict. And this is, him giving this guy praise for something. Wow, that's very impressive. You survived that. What a wonderful human, which again, it's only at best, a year since he'd been sober, if he is at all, right? And so this is him giving cover. This is a comedian who's supposed to be making jokes and, about something like this because it's funny, right? The president having a crackhead son is funny. If anything's funny, that is, right?
It was a journey, but thank God I made it through.
You're calling it a journey? Like a journey, right? There's a couple things here. Like I used drugs when I was, in my early 20s and in high school. I smoked a lot of pot. I used some cocaine, free-base cocaine. Like, most people have some sort of experience with alcohol or drugs, especially in America, at some point in their life. I was never addicted to anything, and, it was just something that I did, and I don't do anything now. I don't drink. I don't, any sort of, use of any of these types of drugs or whatever it is. But I've been around addiction, worked a little bit with addiction as a counselor. I know how tough it is. So, I can understand that part, right, for people who struggle with this. But this guy's saying, thank God he beat it. And he's only been sober for a year at most, right? I'm sure that, he's been in and out of treatment, and, this book that he's writing isn't about his conquering his addiction, because more than likely he'll be back based on everything I see from this guy, that his struggle with this thing ain't over, and it's not a journey. You can't categorize what he's done here with crack and other things as a journey. It's a series of bad decisions and, poor lifestyle and whatever it is, right? It's not something with a positive outcome or an end to it. But the reason he's writing this book, and this is important to understand, this is not him just writing this. Like, he didn't just wing this without any permission from his dad and his family. They encouraged him to write this. His dad's team of handlers encouraged him to write this because his story is a nightmare. It's one of the worst stories that involves a sitting president. His son's, relationship with these various companies in China and things, business relationship and all the things, I'll go through some of the things that are big bombshell stories that the media is simply not covering. And so he's going on Jimmy Kimmel Live after writing this book, and they're presenting it like it's a triumph. Like he triumphed over addiction, and that this is, the mark of a great man and family, and Joe Biden is wonderful. Like, there's so many times Jimmy Kimmel talks about Joe Biden in like saintly terms. It's just, this is a way for them to get out in front of this, horrible story, a bunch of horrible stories tied to Hunter Biden.
Yeah, no kidding. And a lot of the things that you detail happened here in this neighborhood, like right around here.
So Jimmy Kimmel's studio is inside the old Hollywood Freemasonic temple. And so he's not only tying Hunter Biden to Hollywood here, that Hunter Biden was in Hollywood. He had a Hollywood crack addiction. He was in Hollywood doing crack. That's a Freemasonic floor there that Channing Tatum was dancing on. And there's been a lot of ritualistic stuff on Jimmy Kimmel's show. And Hunter Biden was there. He was in Hollywood doing crack across from the Freemasonic Hall and Temple, which is significant to the story and significant to what's going on here with Jimmy Kimmel. A lot of stuff there. A lot of weird stuff went on there in Jimmy Kimmel's studio, and obviously with Hunter Biden in Hollywood.
Yeah. It was like, you were doing crack at the places that I eat.
Yeah.
Jimmy Kimmel is one of those comedians. He's like in the vein of Don Rickles. He goes after people, like I said. Really went after the Trumps, but Hollywood people, celebrities come on there. He has the mean tweets thing. He has the Halloween candy thing he does with kids where parents say that they ate their candy, all these things, right? He likes humiliation. They make kids cry and laugh about it on their show. Weird stuff, right? Very vicious stuff. He was on that Man show, very misogynistic. And he's a guy who goes after people. And he's got a crackhead son of a president, right? It's just funny. Like, saying that makes me laugh. Like, that's funny that the president would have a crackhead son, because crack is like the worst, right? I mean, all the drugs and things. Being a crackhead, like I use crackhead, like I say, Kmart is a crackhead brother of Walmart. I mean, and so, you have this funny thing. And there's a lot funny about it. And even, the revelations in the book are funny. I've already covered some of those that they've put out on New York Post. So he has all this comic value here. And he's just giving him a free pass and like patting him on the back. I mean, it's, I watched the whole interview, and I'm not covering all of it here. But he's just like, kissing Hunter Biden's feet here and praising Joe Biden. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Like... Like Jimmy Kimmel, he's not funny and the show's bad, but he's taken it to another level in shillery here.
I feel like I learned a lot about crack, and I know that sounds weird, but I learned how to I really think I could get it now, thanks to your book.
Well, I hope that wasn't the message.
The message is that Joe Biden's a great guy and Hunter Biden's misunderstood. He had this addiction, which he now has beaten, and it's a triumph So no reason to investigate or look into any of these possible crimes and certainly immoral things that went on in the Biden family that centered around Hunter Biden and his addictive personality. That's the message. And Jimmy Kimmel's like praising him like it's a how-to book, right?
In fact, like where we're situated right now, the Roosevelt Hotel is right across the street from us. This is where you had, would you call it a bender?
I was at every hotel in Los Angeles.
The Roosevelt Hotel is sort of a high-end, $300 a night room kind of a place. And Hollywood is a scummy, degraded area. It's just not a nice place. People think of Hollywood being glamorous, but none of those celebrities live there. So there's a lot of crack around there. There's Jimmy Kimmel's Freemasonic temple place, and then there's all the, the tourism aspect of this. And Hunter Biden was in LA connected to all these celebrities and the celebrity culture. And that's a big part of Joe Biden's, they're connected to that, right? Which is a horrible thing. We know that now, like how bad celebrity culture is and Hollywood is. Now that they're rolling it out, Hollywood morality for everybody, right? And Hunter Biden was there in that, and they're brushing over all this stuff. Of course they are, because they're not going to condemn something they're a part of, but it shows you how degraded all this is.
One of the stories was you went just down the block from us, to Sunset La Brea, and you looked for some guys who might be able to get you something.
Not something, crack, Jimmy. He was looking for crack in Hollywood, which is, got multiple meanings. But he was out in Hollywood getting some crack on the streets. He's illustrating his, one of his stories of his crack addiction in Hollywood.
Yeah. And then you wound up getting it and using crack with them. Were those guys dressed as Spider-Man by any chance?
So that's your joke? Like, this is the story we just heard. The son of the president, again, there's been a lot of screw-ups. A lot of these guys have screw-up brothers. Bill Clinton's brother, W. Bush was the screw-up brother, right? But a lot of them have these, addict brothers or, children and just whatever it might be. And Joe Biden, because he's so old, he has an old, 40-something-year-old, almost 50-year-old son who had a long, horrible addiction to crack and bad decision-making. And he's out in Hollywood Boulevard looking for crack, and he finds it. And he then smokes crack with some crackheads and crack dealers. And Jimmy Kimmel, who has all this material and potential, that's a funny story in itself, just the irony, right? You got the president and you got a crackhead son, right? They're just, connected here. The presidency is connected to crack, right? There's crack addiction in his family. And his joke is about these guys being possibly dressed up as Spider-Man, because they all have these people dressed up as, celebrities on Hollywood Boulevard. And that's the joke. Like, that's the only humor he can find, It's a sad day for comedy here.
No, well, maybe, I don't know. Some things I don't recall exactly.
So some things he doesn't recall. This is post Burisma. Like some of these stories, all this time period, and he's going to say this about his laptop, right? This is post Burisma. This is post his $1 million deal with China, that he could remember things. Like he was hired to do these very high-level jobs, and he doesn't remember things. Like he couldn't remember, the people or whatever it might be because he was smoking crack all the time. Like highly inefficient as an employee, right? Like he's an executive, a vice president's son, and then now a president's son, a recognizable name, one of the most powerful people in Washington as a politician, one of the most powerful politicians, Joe Biden, over the years. A lifer, 47 years in the Congress and then as a vice president. And he's, out there using this name to buy influence. People are buying influence with him. And he doesn't remember anything. Like he's not hired because of his ability to perform, right? He's, basically admitting that here because he couldn't even function.
Because, I think the question that most addicts have a really hard time answering. And what everybody that's a non-addict wants the answer to is why. Mm-hmm. And, there's a simple answer, and that's because it works.
Find out what crack can do for you. He's saying crack works. It makes you not be who you are, right? It makes you not, drugs are something that takes you away from your worries, your responsibilities, it numbs you out and helps you not to think about what a piece of crap you are, or whatever it is. Like what you don't want to face within yourself and with your life, right? That's why it's called self-medicating. People drink and they, use drugs to forget like what it feels like to be them. I mean, it's something to take you away. It's an escape from the hell that is your life. And he's saying crack works because he doesn't want to be Hunter Biden. And, I don't blame him.
It certainly was not a how-to manual.
No, but it is a very vivid and detailed description of what it feels like to use crack.
Yeah.
And we all need that in our lives, right? That's what we were missing. A vivid, detailed book about what it feels like to use crack from the president's son. Like, we were missing this, we just never do.
But crack brought me to a place that I'd never had been to before.
Now that's a bumper sticker. Crack brought me to a place I'd never been to before. Merch up, buddy. You got a winner there. Get some t-shirts. Hunter Biden, the president's son. Crack brought me to a place I'd never been to before. Brought him to the mountain, to the top of it.
I mean, listen, we know you. You've had a hard life. There's no question about it.
So, of course, you ended up doing crack. I mean, it's completely understandable with a life like his, being a congressman's son and growing up with all that wealth and privilege and all the things that he had. Of course, he'd end up on Hollywood Boulevard smoking crack, right? I mean, what other outcome could there have been?
I thought very interestingly positive things like you finding a friend, a crack addict on the street who then moved into your house and you had this kind of great relationship with, other than the crack.
It's a feel-good story. It's it's inspirational tale of a crackhead and his journeys.
Yeah, other than the crack, right? But it's a...
the crack is kind of important. Like, it's the central, it's the underlying reasons for the addiction and the psychological makeup of somebody. And then that person, because of the position his dad has, being given these jobs and having influence, and his dad being influenced by people hiring his crackhead son. China and the Ukrainian company of Burisma, foreign governments, foreign entities, having access to Joe Biden and influence over him because they hired his crackhead son. Like, that's the essence of this story, because it's important. Like, if he was just a crackhead, that'd be one thing. But he was crackhead with very high-level jobs only because of his dad and the influence that he provided those companies with his dad. And we're talking about billions of dollars here and corruption and things like this.
What I wanted to write the book for was to humanize people suffering from addiction.
See, that's fundamentally dishonest, because this isn't a book he writes without permission and encouragement from Biden's team. Biden's a lifelong politician, and they know that they have a disaster on their hands with Hunter. Like, if this was any other time in political history, the media would be savage in this guy, and Jimmy Kimmel would be all over him. Like, Jimmy Kimmel would be, roasting him, because this is comic fodder, and this is, the kind of stuff that the media dreams about. Having the president have a crackhead son who is also an executive because, influence and corruption, all these things. But they're giving him a free pass as they are JoJo. And that is, it's just not.
Yeah, boy, was your dad persistent. Very, very persistent.
Yeah,
and I can't imagine the nightmare that that he must have been going through.
So here he is. This is a comedian sitting across from a crackhead son of a president, and a president who is, was always known as a bungler, a groper, a sniffler, and a snoozler. I mean, the guy was Barack Obama's goofy sidekick, and he was a joke, right? He got caught lying, making up, plagiarizing speeches of other people and pretending he had like relatives that were coal miners because the speech he stole was about relatives who were coal miners. So like he lied about his own family. I mean, he got, over and over again, just a lifelong Washington, D.C. insider, not a good guy, not a guy that was respected before they chose him to unseat Trump. And so there's so much comic value in JoJo himself. Here's the latest video from the comedian Kyle Doonigan that's entitled The Fresh Prince of D.C., where he does like JoJo being Will Smith rapping, and it's hilarious. My wife and I have watched it like 6 times already, 7 times. I mean, it's got like 5 or 6 just laughing out loud funny jokes, and he gets into all of it. Like here's a small portion of it.
Then I got on a train and moved to D.C. Barack Obama gave a job to me. I shuffled around and sucked fingertips, made a big speech, kissed a boy on the lips. What are you looking at? I wrote the damn bill.
And it's hilarious. And you think about the comic value that's here. Like for JoJo. I documented the 2015 hit piece that Breonna Keeler of CNN and CNN did on JoJo, where they documented his groping and his lying and his snoozling and all the things, him being a gaffe magnet and what a nightmare candidate he was, because they wanted Hillary to be the nominee in 2016, and so they did a hit piece on JoJo. And comedians like Jon Stewart and David Letterman were making fun of him. I mean, there are a lot of comedians. He was the joke, right? And he has a crackhead son. And Jimmy Kimmel here is, praising and glorifying his crackhead son and treating JoJo like he's some sort of a saint, right? And Jimmy Kimmel is like a jerk, right? He's not a nice guy. Like he goes after people. I mean, he's a Don Rickles mold of comedians, and here he is just giving them a free pass. And this is how the media's treated JoJo, when it's not fair and equitable. If Trump had a crackhead son, then this would be covered completely different, and everybody knows it, right?
The Ukraine and it became an issue. It became something. It gave Donald Trump something to grab onto.
So this is where I'm going to get into more documentation. I have a lot here, right? Because what he just said here was they made this into an issue. And it was an issue on every level. Because this guy's admitted to being a crackhead. He was in and out of rehab 8 times. And this is a period of, when he had these high-end jobs. So if you put a drug addict in a high-end job and he had, behaviors related to drug addiction. I mean, he had all these, these pictures on his laptop and behaviors he engaged in that were all blackmailable, right? These companies would own him. They would have security around him and they would see what he was doing. They knew what he was doing, and they could go to his vice president dad and say, hey, well, expose what your kid's doing here. I mean, even criminal behavior. He's, engaging in criminal drug use with hanging out with drug dealers and things like this. And so all of those things were, fodder for blackmail and, scandal. And then they had access to his dad. So this isn't some like, oh, Trump, blew this thing up. I mean, him admitting that he was a crackhead, why he had these jobs, shows he doesn't deserve these jobs. I'll get more into that in just a moment, but it's all right here, the documentation of it.
Yeah, and I meant what I said. I meant what I wrote, is that, go to the beginning, is that, I went to Yale Law School. I served on at least a dozen boards before Burisma. I was a vice chairman of the board of Amtrak.
So what you're saying is you're the poster child for white male privilege, right? All these guys who are, Jimmy Kimmels and all these Hollywood, celebrity culture and the liberals are pushing this idea of white privilege and white male privilege. And no one exemplifies white male privilege than Hunter Biden. The fact that he's being interviewed as a crackhead. He wrote a book about being a crackhead, and Jimmy Kimmel is interviewing him. Like, name one other crackhead that Jimmy Kimmel interviewed, right? And if it was a celebrity. Like, this is not some random crackhead off the street that people ridicule and make fun of. He's being interviewed because he's Joe Biden's son, and he's given privileged treatment here. Very compassionate Jimmy Kimmel, because of his hatred for Trump and all the, dynamics that are at play here, the Hollywood dynamics. But Hunter Biden was somebody who was always a screw-up. He had a lifelong battle with addiction, and he went to Yale Law School, which, again, didn't deserve, right? I mean, you can't function when you're using that amount of drugs and the kind of drugs he was using. He's had a lifelong addiction, sex addiction, going to strip clubs. I mean, across the board, he has an addictive personality, indulgent personality, blowing through money. And so he doesn't deserve any of these positions. Like, he's saying he deserves the Burisma position because he had all this, these credentials. He only got the credentials because his dad. He only, was given all this stuff because of the white male privilege. He is, this is the epitome of that, right? This is something they talk about. This is their version of reality, where people have privileges, and no one has more privileges than, Joe Biden's kids. I mean, I guess, the Queen, the royal family and these people. But we're talking about the elite, right? These are literally the elite people that are on the capstone of the pyramid. And he's, a crackhead son who's given preferential treatment all the time. He's getting, breaks from the media, breaks from the criminal justice system. This is a guy who should have been in jail multiple times.
I was the chairman of the board of the World Food Program U.S., largest, supporting the largest humanitarian organization in the world. I had an expertise in corporate governance. I was asked to serve on the board for corporate governance, and I was a lawyer at Boies, Schiller, and Flexner.
Wait, you were a crackhead and a lawyer?
Which was how I was first approached. However, what I didn't take into account was the way in which they would use the perception against my dad. And for that, I wouldn't do it again for that reason.
The perception is reality. You got the job because of your connection to your dad, because of who's your dad was. And all those other jobs you listed, you got those jobs as being a Biden as well. You're not successful. You're somebody who had, a brutal crack addiction. I mean, something that dominated your life, and not just that. And we'll go through some of these things. Let's go through those things now to really put this in context. First of all, there was another interview that he did with an ABC reporter where he admitted the Biden name was responsible for all of these things.
You didn't have any extensive knowledge about natural gas or Ukraine itself, though.
No, but I think that I had as much knowledge as anybody else that was on the board, if not more.
In the list that you gave me of the reasons why you're on that board, you did not list the fact that you were the son of the vice president.
Of course, yeah. No.
What role do you think that played?
I think that it is impossible for me to be on any of the boards that I just mentioned without saying that I'm the son of the vice president of the United States.
So he admits to it, right? He admits that being the son of Joe Biden helped him on every level here, which we know, and gave him cover, and he got breaks because he did a lot of stuff when he was addicted to crack through his addictions, which was covered up, right? Because he was the son of the vice president and somebody running for president and somebody who had influence in Washington. So the guy is privileged, right? He's privileged, and he's got advantages that other people don't have, and created, gateways of influence with the U.S. government, where Joe Biden, who was in charge of billions of dollars of resources in the Ukraine and now to do with China and things like this, was, not just Hunter, but Joe Biden's brother. They had this interview where the business partner with them talked about China giving them $10 million to, buy Joe Biden, giving the Biden family $10 million, right? 5 of it went to Joe Biden or whatever it was. And so, that's what should be talked about here, that this looks completely, it's a gateway for corruption and everything bad, right? It's everything that this type of privilege, elite privilege, is condemned for, and they're celebrating it. They're giving this guy a pass, and they're praising JoJo like he's some sort of a saint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it make you crazy when you hear someone like Donald Trump Jr. saying that the only reason he does is because he's a Biden and because of his last name, and how just wildly comical that is? I mean, does it?
It is wildly
Comical in the sense that you're the president's son and former vice president's son, who's a crack addict, who had these jobs that you had when you were using crack that you weren't qualified for, and you were given these jobs, right? And so, again, that's the comical side, but the serious side is the corruption and the influence and the greasy Washington, D.C. politics and privileges here is a story that should get rid of Joe Biden as a politician forever.
is that I don't spend too much time thinking about that.
I do. I think about it all the time. Yeah. I'll think about it for you.
See, Jimmy Kimmel's talking about the Trump kids, how obsessed he is with Trump and the Trump kids. And think about that. There's Trump kids, and I don't like either one of them, or, the two older sons. But, they're not crackheads. I'm sure they're involved in some levels of corruption, but not in the governmental role, at least as far as we know now. And so, he's giving unfair treatment here, where he has this huge story sitting right across from him, and he's making it about the Trump's kids, right? How bad they are. Like, think about what's happening here. And it gets worse because of some more revelations that Hunter Biden unloads here.
Laptop, and when they ask you if that was your laptop, you say you don't know, which is hard to believe unless you read the book.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of like, I'm surprised you have shoes on.
Look at the cover Jimmy Kimmel's given him here. He's surprised he has shoes on, but they just joked about how it's like ridiculous that anyone would infer that he didn't deserve these positions, but he's a crackhead who Jimmy Kimmel's like, I'm surprised you could even wear shoes, that you remember to wear shoes. What an accomplishment. Of course you could sit on a board and you deserve to be on a board, but putting shoes, that's an accomplishment for you. Just think about what's being said here.
It's kind of like, I'm surprised you have shoes on.
Yeah. Read the book. Yeah. I made it today.
You're such a hero with the tough life you've had, Hunter, and all this stuff, and you wore your shoes today. Good boy. Let's give him a gold star. Let's give him a ribbon. He remembered to put on his shoes.
Pants were the problem. Yeah.
Pants are always the problem, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, pants are always the problem, right? Look at what they're admitting to here. Talking about his dad as well, and there were so many things on the laptop which were, shirtless and pantless. Think about what they're saying here. I'm going to go through the timeline of the laptop. Now we have this admission of what was going on Hunter's end with all these pictures and why he was doing these jobs he clearly didn't deserve because he was smoking crack, right? Very seldom can you have a crack addiction and hold a high-end job, right? It's impossible. And then all the other drama and things that are going on with him. And I'll go through just some of it in a moment.
No, look, I really don't know. And the fact of the matter is it's a red herring. It is absolutely a red herring. But I am absolutely, I think, within my rights to question anything that comes from the desk of Rudy Giuliani.
Well, it's not a red herring. All the information is there. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or a pattern recognition person to put it together, but it's all right there. But for him to say that he doesn't trust anything that comes from the desk of Rudy Giuliani, right, who, I don't like, and so therefore it can't be true because Rudy Giuliani's involved with it. Well, it is true. So let's go through a timeline here. So to fully understand this, Hunter Biden dropped the laptop off in April of 2019. So that's just 2 years ago. This isn't like, he's been sober for 10 years or something. It just happened 2 years ago. And this is a headline from The Guardian. what wasn't in Hunter Biden's book, how he got unauthorized Secret Service protection, begged Joe Biden to run for White House to salvage his own reputation, and made porn films with prostitutes. Forensic experts prove laptop is president's son's. So here's the thing. As of April of 2019, so this is 2 years ago, Hunter Biden is admitting he was so messed up then, just 2 years ago, he doesn't remember if he dropped his laptop off at a computer store or not. Like, he doesn't know. But we know that there's pictures and emails and things that are all his. And they, so he's basically admitting that it's his. But they're saying maybe it's been doctored or added to by the Russians. But he opened the door for that, right? By dropping off a laptop at a computer store, not picking it up, a hard drive with all this information on it, which could be used to blackmail him and his dad and could be hacked by other people. That's a national security risk, among other things that he did. And so for them to call this a red herring, and he's saying that the Trump kids, and so is Jimmy Kimmel, and Rudy Giuliani don't have less credibility than he has. But he is a nightmare of a human being, and he is, worse than all of them. I mean, at least in terms of what we know about him. I mean, they're all bad. I'm not a right-wing person. I'm not a Trump person. I'm not any of those things. All of D.C. is corrupt, but this is one of the worst figures, and his dad on top of it, and the level of corruption here, that this guy would be given these jobs when he was, he was incapable of remembering where he dropped something off. Think about the level of disconnect and cognitive dissonance between his actions and what he was doing, and then the pictures and all the things that came out on the laptop. So these are a few excerpts for some other videos I did, and then I'll, give more context to all of this. So this brings us back to Hunter Biden. I saw this on Twitter. Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo, dozens of former intel officials say. And this is Political's new headline after the election. Justice Department's interest in Hunter Biden covered more than taxes. And I'll get to the guy who delivered his hard drive has put out a YouTube video, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But here's the story. Justice Department interest in Hunter Biden covered more than taxes. And it says this. Federal investigation into President-elect Joe Biden's son, Hunter, has been more extensive than a statement from Hunter Biden indicates, according to a person with first-hand knowledge of the investigation. On Wednesday, Hunter Biden said he had been contacted about a tax investigation out of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware. In addition to Delaware, the Securities Fraud Unit in the Southern District of New York also scrutinized Hunter Biden's finances. So this is just more than, Trump's people. This is actual, people investigating this on their own. According to one person with direct knowledge of the investigation, the person said that as of early last year, investigators in Delaware and Washington was also probing potential money laundering, and Hunter Biden's foreign ties. The person spoke on a condition of anonymity because they are not authorized to discuss the matter publicly. Now, all of a sudden, these media organizations are looking into this. In addition to the probe, Hunter Biden federal authorities in Western District of Pennsylvania are conducting a criminal investigation of a hospital business in which Joe Biden's brother James was involved. Federal officials have asked questions about James Biden's role in the business, according to second person with direct knowledge of the investigation, who said it remains ongoing. There's no indication that Joe Biden himself is under investigation, but if the cases remain open when Joe Biden takes office, they could complicate his presidency and shine an unflattering light on his relatives' dealings, which often seek to capitalize on Biden's family political connections. Now, we don't know where this is going. Let me show you this other guy first. Repair shop owner at center of Hunter Biden saga defends himself. And so this guy is John Mac Isaac, and he talks about not being a Russian agent here. He talks about being from a Scottish descent. His grandfather was, was a war hero. Talks about his dad, right? And I guess he has some kind of problem with his eyesight, so he couldn't be in the military. But he says,
For 2 generations, the Mac Isaac family has fought during the entirety of the Cold War against communism and the Soviets.
And so that's from an older video, I don't know, a couple months old, but it was revealed that William Barr, Trump's secretary, Trump's head of the DOJ, Department of Justice, knew about all this stuff and didn't divulge it in the summer when it would have been a scandal. That Hunter Biden was being investigated for all kinds of things, including money laundering and other things. And so that was covered up. He got preferential treatment for that. Here's the guy that Hunter Biden dropped his laptop off. And so this guy's a witness. He had it. And he says he's not a Russian spy. He's not a hacker. And he was given this stuff. And it was, during this campaign. So it's, kind of a disaster, right? And then there's like other things that Hunter Biden was involved in as well. Here's another clip from one of my videos. Greetings, brothers and sisters. The New York Post is getting it done on their Hunter Biden's paternity case, but it's now confirmed he's admitted that he conceived an Arkansas love child, an Arkansas stripper love child with a former stripper who went by the name of Dallas in Washington, D.C., but she lives in Arkansas. So I want to give more of a timeline and perspective on this, but let's go to the end of the Jimmy Kimmel interview because it ties into this, stripper baby, this crack baby.
And so I don't know is the answer.
Do you ever wish you'd had Apple Care?
Yeah, that would have been a good...
Which is a lie. That's the answer of whether it's his laptop or not. It is. If it wasn't, he'd be like, no, it's not my laptop. And so I don't know is a lie, right? He knows, we know it was his laptop. It's been proven over and over again, and it's his laptop. And so there's so much damaging things on that laptop, not only to him, but even more importantly to JoJo.
You are married now. You found love, but the way you found love, you have to understand that on paper this doesn't sound good.
Which is unusual for you because, on paper you sound great. Like the crackhead thing, the jobs you don't deserve, the corruption, the laptop scandal, all the things, the headlines. On paper you sound like a real catch and winner. But like this story is, we got a question. This story, you don't sound so good on paper.
Okay, and correct me if I have any of the details wrong.
Okay.
You meet some strangers.
Yeah.
They say, oh, we have a girl you should meet.
Yeah.
They give you her phone number.
Yeah.
You text her like
what kind
late
of friends
at night.
Is that?
He meets strangers and they give him a name and a number of some girl. You should meet this girl. Oh, thanks, strangers. And he texts her in the middle of the night.
Yeah, exactly.
She's sleeping.
Yeah.
She's like, leave me alone. I'm asleep. The next morning she texts you. You guys have like lunch together or something.
Yeah.
Lunch or crack? I don't know. One of the two. Crack or lunch? Was it lunch or was it crack?
In an hour, you tell her you love her.
Yeah.
She tells you she loves you.
Yeah.
He tells you she loves you? Like, what are you talking about, Kimmels? And so think about what's being said here. The impulsivity. This is all addictive behavior. I'll come back to this.
Then she finds out you are a crack addict.
Well, I tell her.
Yeah.
I mean, within the hour before I told her I loved her so that she had an out, I told her. I said, look, I have a real problem.
Problems. It's not a one-off with you, buddy. It's problems.
But it's amazing.
And then you marry her a week later.
Yeah.
This is,
Yeah.
You're applauding why? Like, the guy's talked about being a crackhead. I mean, he hasn't had a good life in terms of his performance. And, they're celebrating this guy, defending him. This is a cupcake interview, right? He's just handing him softball questions and supporting him, because of the whole JoJo anti-Trump stuff, which is, kind of despicable here. And then he, this story of desperation and, he's now had a baby with this woman, and I'll get more into it in a second. But then listen to what JoJo had to say about it.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm your dad and you tell me this story, I go, oh, no, 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 no. What did your dad say when you called to tell him this?
Of course you would say no, 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 no. I mean, that's the appropriate response given this guy's history. You know,
Now what? He said, I called him to tell him, and he got on the phone with Melissa, and he said, I'll tell you the same thing that my mom, my grandmother, said to my now mother. And he said, I thank you for giving my son the courage to love again.
Wow. Wow. He always says the right thing, doesn't he?
He does.
Yeah.
do you hear what those MNFers just said? Joe Biden always says the right thing. I mean, that guy who's been known as a gaffe magnet for years. I mean, he's just a walking gaffe, bumbling and, you know, not capable of putting together clear, articulated thoughts. And he says he always says the right thing, but Jimmy Kimmel said if he had been the guy's dad, he would have been no, 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 no. Of course he would have been. Because impulsivity and the inability to withhold gratification, to suspend gratification, is a big part of being an addict, right? And the fact that he told this girl that he loved her within an hour, and he's had a long history, I mean, crack whores and just all these things. His brother's, his dead brother's widow, I mean, and that, and you know, all the scandals he has. And he tells her he loves her within an hour, and you know, he's an older guy, right? They get married a week later, and he impregnates her, and she has a baby. And at the same time, he has a stripper that he met when he was in the VIP. He used to go to these VIP clubs in New York City and in Washington, D.C., and other places in the world. These strip clubs where he would sit in the VIP areas, right, which cost thousands of dollars just to sit in those areas. And he was seen smoking crack and, you know, getting it on with the strippers. And there's this one stripper named Dallas from Arkansas in New York City, I believe, or D.C., I'm not sure which. And he impregnated her. And then she sued him for child support, and he claimed the baby wasn't his. And then when it was proved that it was his, he didn't want to divulge his income. He didn't want people to know how much money he was making, and he wanted to delay the case until after the election because everyone knew it was a scandal, but no media outlet would cover it. This guy, you know, this is a big deal. This is the, you know, a vice president's son who has, you know, questionable business dealings, and now his father's running for president, and is, you know, all this stuff. I mean, it caused an impeachment. It was big news on Trump's end. I mean, they punished Trump for it, but this guy was a nightmare, all of these things that he was involved in. And then he fathers a Arkansas stripper baby. He's in Arkansas, you know, battling over child support while the election's going on, and they didn't cover it all, just like the New York Post was like the only media outlet to cover it. And comedians, I mean, this is all funny stuff, right? This is the worst relative of any person who ever was president. And Jimmy Kimmel's, you know, praising him like he's accomplished something. And, you know, during this process, he has a baby with his new love that he met, you know, through some strangers in midnight text and after a lunch, and they get married and have a baby. And now he has this child, right? This, you know, impulsivity. He has two children at the same time. This impulsive marriage he's in, you know, all is about addictive behavior. And then this stripper baby he has. And now then he writes a book saying, hey, this is how I conquered my crack addiction and how he got over his addictions, which he obviously isn't over his addiction. And his father praises the whole thing, you know, like he's rocking it. And they're celebrating this, you know, book instead of, you know, looking at it as an admission of all the things that we know, that he was using crack and addicted to drugs while he was serving on these boards. You know, being on a board is one of the cushiest, best jobs. And the reason he got those jobs, which he admitted in an earlier interview, was because his dad was vice president. And then he turns over this laptop. He, you know, gives this laptop to some computer sales, a computer repair shop, and it ends up having all kinds of incriminating information. And their former business partner goes on Tucker Carlson and says that the Chinese government paid Joe Biden and his family $5 million. And so this is all scandalous, right? But they're trying to get out in front of this, you know, and then it comes out that he was being investigated, which was covered up. He's getting all this preferential treatment. This is the epitome of white male privilege, all these things. Like he's able to get away with things other people can't. And the Secret Service was covering up this story about his girlfriend, who was his brother's widow, took his handgun and threw it in a trash can, an open trash can across the street from a high school, and a homeless guy picked it up. Completely dangerous and a felony, and all of these things. I mean, just nightmare behavior. This guy's a train wreck on every level, and they're not reporting this. Which if this was Trump's kids, I mean, they're still doing things about disparaging things to Trump, who's disappeared. He's basically done, right? People think he's going to come back, and he's going to be 78, but the way he went out and kind of turned on his supporters and all these things, but they're still covering him in a negative way. And JoJo has one of the worst. I mean, he just has a poor record himself, and then all this scandalous stuff that he has with his son, and they're refusing. I mean, the media is refusing to cover this, and social media as well. All these places, it's being swept under the rug. And I say over and over again, I don't believe that there's a political solution. I believe that our system's going to collapse one way or another, because it has to. It's a bad system, and it's making people worse. People are going away from God, and everyone's getting weaker and more entitled. I mean, it's bad for human beings. So the system is on its way out. And I've accepted that, and a part of the heartfulness meditation that I do, that there's a spiritual solution that's going to come out of the collapse of this system. And so I believe all those things. I mean, it's something that I've seen over and over again, and I see it, now in this and everything else. And so I take all of these things lightly. I mean, people sucking and failing at their jobs and all of it. I mean, it's hard to watch, but I know there's a reason for it. But the one problem with this, or one of the aspects of this, is that it's completely out of balance, because we have a binary system, the right and the left, the Republicans and the Democrats, and everything's skewed in one direction now, where, the left and the Democrats and, Biden and, these people are all getting preferential coverage, and they're just lying to people. And for those of us who can see it, it's just, I mean, it's hard to watch, because no one likes to see something that's so unfair in a time when all these woke people are talking about privilege and how everything needs to be fair, and there's lots of people who are disenfranchised, and people who are treated in a way that's different because of their racial demographics or their sexual orientation or all these kinds of things that the media is pushing out there, that everyone needs to be treated fairly. And the ultimate white privilege story here is Hunter Biden going to Yale, becoming a lawyer, and getting these cushy jobs, all while being a crack addict, an alcoholic, a sex addict, and a person that makes horrible decisions on every level, a nightmare human being, and then writes a book, 6 months to a year after maybe being sober, if he really is sober right now, and he's being celebrated on a victory tour with JoJo and Jimmy Kimmel and all these things. I mean, it's just, the hypocrisy is off the charts, as the great Don Lemons would say. Only spirituality will save this world. Is Paul Romano definitely reporting from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.